Singapore was awesome. Carlos Sainz, round of applause, my friend. He won his second race in F1 thanks to his performance on the weekend. He becomes just the 8th active driver to have multiple race wins. Nate, I think it was you on the last pod. You mentioned how impressive Sainz has been since the summer break. What did you think of his race weekend overall?
Best race of Carlos Sainz's career, quite comfortably, and Monza.
Yeah.
Monza was really strong, when he held off Charles, held off Max for a lot of that race as well. And you're right, yeah, he's and he even spoke about this change that he's had since the summer break. I think he said he and his mechanics and his engineers sat down and they said, right, I've got pace during a weekend. I know I'm quick, but we saw so often with Sainz through weekends, especially earlier this year, he would look quick in practice, and then suddenly out of nowhere, Charles Leclerc, who's probably the best qualifier in Formula One, would just pull a lap out of somewhere, qualify ahead of Sainz, maybe by 1, 2, 3, or maybe even 4 positions, and that dictates your whole weekend from that point. If you're the second car, you often end up on the second best strategy because the team says, well, optimum strategy goes to the guy in front. That's just the way it is. And Sainz, I've got to say, from the moment the session started in Singapore, he looked like he was on it, and he qualified on pole, and I had my doubts because I wondered, it's a difficult situation for Ferrari to be in. They've got Charles was, the second Ferrari on the racetrack during the race, but Ferrari, fair play to them, they called it really well. Charles got really unlucky with on the pit stops, but Sainz did everything he had to do, and we can dig into this now, but one of the smartest wins I think I've seen for a very long time, just the way he backed Lando, into the DRS, his own DRS zone. He even had Ferrari saying to him, you do know he's still in DRS rank, right? He's like, yeah, it's on purpose. But I think it was a really interesting insight into Sainz's kind of his temperament. The head that he's got on his shoulders he's a really smart racing driver. Mm-hmm. And actually at Ferrari, I think we're starting to see you've got these two very, very different drivers. You've got Charles Leclerc, who's kind of the raw talent and maybe beats himself up quite a bit when he makes mistakes, maybe is in his own head quite a bit. With Sainz, I would say, if you were to compare the two, probably isn't as naturally gifted as Charles, but we're seeing now that he's obviously worked out a way to race, worked out a way to drive consistently, and if he can carry this on, I think he's in great shape going into next year. Obviously, he doesn't have a contract like Charles beyond 2024, but yeah, superb race from him. And I've got to say, I've not always spoken super glowingly about Sainz, especially earlier in the year. So I think he's proving a lot of critics wrong at the moment, and especially with that. It's one of the best wins I've seen for a long time from any driver. Really, really good.
I think consistency, Tyler, was the word that sticks out most. And also just, he not only physically did a great job, mentally, I thought he just was light years ahead of everybody else on that racetrack. Nate brings it up, Tyler, but what did you think at the end of the race and how things played out with the little Carlando that we got to see?
Smooth operator, guys. You go on YouTube right now, and if you look at Sade smooth operator, all of the top comments now are about Carlos Sainz. But the immense pressure that he was under from the get-go, it was, he knew from the jump what would happen, and then as the race evolved, his racecraft to me is really what stuck out. And your point, Nate, about the raw speed that we've seen with Leclerc and Charles being so fast, but Sainz, he just doesn't seem to get rattled. And you look back to last year, years past, and some of those DNFs that he had, or wrecks, even Suzuka last year, he first lap he doesn't finish. It didn't seem to be his fault. So the results didn't always seem to be on his end, but the results weren't there. But he has really settled into a groove. And Katie, to your question, it was amazing to watch that and to see, I can't think of another moment where there were two drivers that were on opposite teams, but were working together because the benefit, it was a zero sum. The benefit was for both of them.
Yeah.
For Lando to finish second because he knew, hey, this is my best chance to podium. And for Carlos out front, knowing, hey, I'm going to do this intentionally. And at tip of the cap to Ferrari. I've been critical of Ferrari. Everybody's been critical of Ferrari. Absolutely. But the Ferrari apparatus, Fred Vasseur, and what they've done, they nailed it. The strategy at the start to put Charles on the softs to then back it up. And I think one of the biggest takeaways for me, guys, the point of this sport is to go fast, but Carlos went slow. He went slow, and he drove to a delta. He drove to a time, and it was perfectly executed. And it was great to see.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.